When Britain's stately homes fell on hard times in the 20th century, their bewildered owners tried everything to keep their inheritance, from safari parks to zoos and hotels. Today, a visit to a country house is part of our daily life, but the idea is relatively new, except at Chatsworth, where visitors have been made welcome since the house was completed in the 18th century. For Chatsworth, we have to thank Bess of Hardwick. This remarkable woman had 4 husbands, and it was with her second, Sir William Cavendish, that she built a house in a valley in her native Derbyshire. It was remote from London, where Sir William was one of Henry VIII's trusted advisors, but Bess made its construction and that of Hardwick Hall nearby a life's work. After her death in 1608, Bess's creation went to sleep for nearly 80 years. But in 1686, her successor, the 1st Duke of Devonshire, decided to make some alterations. His plan was to remodel just the south front and keep the rest of the house as it was. But the 1st Duke got bitten by the building bug. Although he only intended to remodel the south facade, he couldn't resist taking down the east, then the west, and finally the north facade. In fact, he got a bit carried away. While the house was being altered to what we see today, he took on George London and Henry Wise to design a huge formal garden, and a Frenchman called Grillet to build a water cascade. The 1st Duke died in 1707, but he lived just long enough to see his creation completed. The Cavendish family, first Earls, then Dukes of Devonshire, lost and remade a fortune in the 16th century, supported Charles I in the English Civil War, during which they narrowly avoided losing Chatsworth to Parliament, helped bring William III and Queen Mary to the throne, and entered politics. One of them was briefly Prime Minister. But they all had the same idea about their country seat, that it should be part of the community and open to all. In the 18th century, the Duke and Duchess of Devonshire spent most of their time in London, but they left instructions with the housekeeper at Chatsworth to show people round if they called. And that idea, that Chatsworth belongs somehow not only to the family which built it, but also to the nation, has lasted for 300 years. Chatsworth is a mix of art and architecture and styles applied over 3 centuries. The 1st Duke altered the outside of his house, but kept much that was inside, including this fabulous ceiling in the painted hall, which is the work of Louis Laguerre. Successive dukes left their mark. The marble floor belongs to the 5th Duke, the stairs to the 9th, and this charming and sad inscription to the 6th, who never got over the death at the age of 29 of his beloved niece, Blanche. William Spencer, Duke of Devonshire, inherited this most beautiful house from his father in the year 1811, which had been begun in the year of English liberty, 1688, and completed in the year of his sorrow, 1840. The Painted Hall is really the heart of Chatsworth. Successive dukes may have tinkered with it, but Laguerre's ceiling is exactly as it was when the house opened. Everyone passes through here, family, staff and visitors, and every Christmas since 1890, this has been the setting for a party thrown for the children of the estate by the Duke and Duchess of Devonshire. In this house, tradition is important. The heart of Chatsworth is pure theatre. Like the rest of England's nobility, the first Duke wished for one thing above all else: a visit from the King and Queen. Here was the stage on which that visit would be played out. The Painted Hall and the stairs beyond were the route to the first floor, where the Devonshires created a whole suite of state apartments, so that the business of the court could be conducted while the monarch was here. Though the family owned many houses, it was Chatsworth which they remodelled to make it a palace fit for a king. The painted ceiling and the great staircase were built on a ducal scale. This was the Devonshires' principal residence, but it wasn't their only one. They had Hardwicke Hall, also in Derbyshire, Bolton Abbey and Lounsborough Hall in Yorkshire, Lismore Castle in Ireland, Compton Place in Eastbourne, and 3 London residences: Chiswick and Devonshire House and Burlington House, both in Piccadilly. There's a lovely story told by Deborah, the Dowager Duchess of Devonshire, of a conversation she had with her grandmother-in-law. The older Duchess was talking about the family's social calendar. November to January here at Chatsworth, Lismore Castle from February to April, London in May, June and July, Bolton Abbey in August and September for grouse shooting, Hardwicke for partridges in October. But what about Chiswick? Said Deborah. Chiswick? Oh, we sometimes used it for breakfast. The Duke chose baroque for the decoration of the state apartments. What else? It was the fashion, all the rage, imported from continental Europe. There'd been a long gallery in this part of the Elizabethan house. Now the first Duke hoped that it would be the King, William III, and his court, which paraded in the enfilade of rooms he'd arranged. He employed the painters Louis Laguerre and Antonio Verrio to decorate the ceilings, and Samuel Watson for the carving. And he filled these rooms with tapestries woven at Mortlake, and cabinets by the Frenchman André Charles Boulle. There would be a great chamber, a state drawing room, music room, bedroom, and closet. Each room more intimate and richly decorated than the last. By the time it was complete, the Duke must have been convinced that he would be favoured by a royal visit. All this done for the king, but the king never came. 150 years later, the sixth Duke was sorely tempted to do away with this series of rooms which occupied the prime position at Chatsworth. He called them a dismal, ponderous range of Hampton Court-like chambers. Thank goodness he didn't. Otherwise, we'd be denied the opportunity to see this riot of Baroque decoration, all the exquisite craftsmanship that went into a vain attempt to please the king. It was the sixth Duke who perhaps did most to change Chatsworth. He had plenty of time in which to do it. He was a bachelor. He inherited this vast house at the age of 21 and he devoted his life to it. And he employed the architect Sir Geoffrey Wyatville to build the north wing. For nearly 50 years, the bachelor Duke worked on his many houses. At Chatsworth, his new wing included a sculpture gallery to house works, including many by Canova, which he collected in Italy. It was the perfect space in which to interest guests before they went into dinner in the new great dining room, of which he was especially proud. When it was completed in 1832, the sixth Duke thought it was perfect. It was like dining in a great trunk, he said. You expect the lid to open. This is one of 3 dining rooms in Chatsworth, but certainly the grandest and the one with the most history. The first dinner given here was attended by the Duchess of Kent with her daughter, Princess Victoria. At 13, it was the first time she dined with adults. The Duke knew how important that visit was. He staged a dress rehearsal of the whole meal the day before. You could spend an hour in this room and still not take it all in. The 4 side tables were made for the room. The marble fireplaces were carved by Richard Westmacott the Younger and Robert Sevier. The sixth Duke commissioned new silver. The portraits either side of the door are by Van Dyck. But the wall lights are new. They were put up in 1959. The 11th Duke discovered them in the stables. They'd come from Devonshire House in London and lain in packing cases for 40 years. Outside, the Duke took on the young Joseph Paxton as head gardener, the man who would later build Crystal Palace for the 1851 Great Exhibition. The fourth Duke had already radically changed the setting of Chatsworth by employing Capability Brown to create the type of parkland for which he would become so famous. Paxton gave his Duke the Emperor Fountain, a wonderful piece of engineering fed entirely by gravity from reservoirs built on the moor above the house. It was then, and has remained, the symbol of Chatsworth. But these alterations taxed even the wealthiest families. Though he kept Chatsworth, the 6th Duke was forced to sell Lounsborough and most of the town of Wetherby in Yorkshire to pay for the changes. Everyone brought something to Chatsworth. In the case of the bachelor Duke's father, the 5th Duke, it was a ménage à trois involving his wife, the Duchess Georgiana, and her very good friend, Lady Elizabeth Foster. Elizabeth became the Duke's mistress and had 2 children by him, though this didn't seem to affect his relationship with Georgiana. When she died, Elizabeth married the Duke to become the next Duchess. It's one of the oddest stories of Chatsworth, as told by its head of art and historic collections, Matthew Hurst.
All of the objects here recall Georgiana, her taste, things that she commissioned and owned, and including this portrait by Thomas Gainsborough, which shows her in the height of fashion in 1785, when it was painted with these huge, broad-rimmed hats that she was so famous for wearing.
She's got a very cheeky look on her face, hasn't she? A foxy look on her face.
Yes.
Yes. We will know all about her through the book and the film, of course, but that sort of encapsulates her, doesn't it?
I think you do see her personality here, and there's another wonderful portrait in here by Reynolds, Gainsborough's great rival, which is an unfinished portrait, and that has a little bit more of a sense of immediacy about it, and I think is a bit more relaxed, whereas she's obviously clearly posing for us as the spectator.
Well, amidst all the gems in this room and the crystals, there's this little work of art which is hers, is that right? It was hers. Yeah, yes. Tell me about it.
It's a caudle cup and cover on a saucer with a tray, and in all there are actually 9 in the collection. And it was commissioned by Georgiana from the Derby porcelain factory. She was a great supporter of Derby porcelain, being just down the road. And it's a set that she would have used. It was made for caudle, which was a sort of warm gruel, if you like, which would have been laced with ale and was given to women who were unwell or perhaps even in childbirth. So
you think she might have drunk from this cup?
Absolutely, yes, without a doubt. And
to kill the pain?
Probably.
And would it be filled to the top? I presume it must have been, with 2 handles, and you would take it.
Exactly, yes. And the cover is there to keep it all warm for you so that it doesn't go cold. So here we have one of the cups. This is Georgiana's cup, and you can see her initials here with the coronet here in blue, the ducal coronet, and then GD for Georgiana Devonshire. And within this, you've also got this wonderful gilded decoration, which shows all these sort of monsters and snakes and beasts. So at first glance, it looks just like a sort of gold pattern, but actually you've got these sort of little mythological creatures that live in amongst it. And this is quite interesting because in the set we had one saucer with the initials ED on it, and about 2 years ago we were approached by the Derby factory because they had received a letter from somebody in America who had a cup of exactly the same design as these, with the initials ED. And it transpired through research that was done that the ED cup actually belonged to Elizabeth Devonshire, who was originally Elizabeth Foster, part of the great ménage à trois with the 5th Duke and Georgiana. And in 1806, when Georgiana died, Elizabeth Foster married the 5th Duke and became Duchess herself, and we think that she must have commissioned replacement cups for ones that had been broken. And so... Well,
that's the polite way of pushing it.
Well, perhaps.
I mean, from a woman's perspective, it's like what was good for Georgiana is good enough for me, so I want my own, well, but I want it exactly the same.
It could have been that. It could have been that. And so
but it's exactly the same, isn't
exactly
it?
The same. Same initials, but obviously an E instead of a G, and about sort of 15, 20 years later than Georgiana's. So I think it's quite a conscious effort, as you say, to sort of have the same, because it's in the same design, it's the same style, which perhaps would have been a little bit out of date by 1806, 1807.
And you've only got one cup and one saucer.
Exactly.
So out there somewhere, A pile of others.
Perhaps, who knows?
Ring Matthew. Yes. In every age, the Devonshires of Chatsworth had a role to play in the life, not only of Derbyshire, where Bess of Hardwicke had settled in the 17th century, but also in the life of the nation. But it was a struggle. When the 6th Duke died, still a bachelor, the title was inherited by the grandson of his uncle. The 7th Duke lived quietly to make up for the extravagances, perhaps, of the previous 50 years, and mourned the tragic loss of his young wife, to whom that inscription over the fireplace in the painted hall is dedicated. In the 20th century, though the family continued to live in the Grand Manor, death duties nearly did for Chatsworth. The 9th Duke had to sell books and paintings to settle a bill of £500,000, a huge sum in 1912. The 10th Duke succeeded in 1938 and planned to improve Chatsworth, but before he could do so, war broke out. The house was given over to the girls and staff of Penrhos College in Wales, and the Devonshires went to war. The 10th Duke's elder son and heir, William, Billy Hartington they called him, married Kathleen Kennedy, sister of the man who would later become the 35th President of the United States. 4 months later, Billy was killed in action in Belgium, serving with the Coldstream Guards, which is how Chatsworth came to be inherited by the Duke's second son, Andrew Cavendish. Together with his wife, Deborah, youngest of the Mitford sisters, they transformed Chatsworth and reopened it to the public. And now it's the turn of their son, Peregrine, and his wife, Amanda. It's how many years since you've been in charge?
Well, my father died in May 2004, and then we came here on the 1st of January 2006. And so sort of then, roughly.
And you had a plan? You knew what you wanted to do right from the very outset?
No, we didn't really have a plan from the outset. We knew that we needed to do services because my parents had done it 50 years ago, so the heating and the electrics and all those things were worn out. They'd been good, but they'd lasted 50 years. So we needed to do that. And we thought once we're going to do that and make a mess, we might as well make improvements to the visitor route.
But vision, you have, it is like a whirlwind. You're being quite bashful about it, but we're standing here on the oak staircase, surrounded by something that you did just like that. You revealed this wonderful space up here. You did all of this, and this is just a tiny part of what you're doing at Chatsworth.
We were very lucky we got Peter Inskip to be the architect, and he did a lot of research, and one of the things we said was to make the house more intelligible for us and for our visitors was to put it back more or less as it was when it was built in different parts. So this is the Victorian part, and my great-grandmother, Duchess Evelyn, had changed it a lot. And it wasn't that we didn't like her intervention, but we wanted to go back to the original Wyattville.
But also, apart from this, you've introduced modernity into Chatsworth, which I think a lot of people were quite shocked by, the fact that you brought in modern sculptures, modern paintings, that you have a particular view about this house, which is, in a way, unusual, is it not?
Well, I think we're very lucky because we don't have sort of committees to go through or anything like that. And so if we both like something, or even if one of us likes something very much, we can try that and put it. My parents put modern contemporary sculpture, whatever, in 1991 with a Frink Warhorse. So that was the first. And we followed that, and we've perhaps done a bit more of it than they did. But it's really just, it's using the house as a backdrop for one's own taste which we're very lucky to be able to do. And it's great fun.
If you live in a house, and I live in a house, and I would hate to have visitors walking around, walking through, walking in and out, but you don't, as you say, you don't seem to mind any of that. And Chatsworth is absolutely packed with people, isn't it, at weekends and holidays? They love coming here.
I think that it's very popular. It always has been. My parents made it popular, and the people who work here make it popular because they're very welcoming. It's the one thing that we really think we do as well, if not better than anybody else. It's crucial to welcome people as visitors, never ever as the public, and that's what we do from top to bottom, and it works, I think.
And it's always been the same way, hasn't it? In the 18th century, Chatsworth always welcomed visitors. If the Duke and Duchess were away in London, for example, they gave instructions to the housekeeper to make sure if any visitor called that they were made welcome.
Well, I think it's important to remember this house was built to show off. The first Duke rebuilt the Elizabethan house to make it absolutely clear to all who passed by, which were very few people in those days, that he was an important and very successful man. He put in big gold letters his name on the front of the house, just in the same way as Donald Trump does, and for the same reason. He wanted people to know that he lived here, he'd made it, and he could afford to build virtually a palace. And so there's no point building a show-off house. If you then say it's private, keep out. You have to, you know, and now it used to be about the people who lived here. Now it's about the house.
But the responsibilities of looking after a house like this with all these treasures in them is pretty daunting. Is it not daunting? It must be daunting.
Well, it's not daunting because we have a great team, and without them it would be very daunting, but we have brilliant people here. Some have been here a long time, some people have been less long, and between them all and with us sort of getting in the way and interfering, it works okay. There's always things we can do better, but it's certainly not daunting. It's really exciting.
Do you have a favourite Duke?
Well, I mean, obviously my father, because I knew him. I didn't know any. I knew my grandfather a little bit, but I knew my father very well. So that it's good that he's there with his ancestors. But the two figures in the middle, well, here is Lord Burlington and his family, who were in a way nothing to do with us, except the younger daughter, the little one we're looking at the music. She married the person who became the fourth Duke, and there's a painting of him in the corner, much older. She died when she was very young, but she was the only surviving child of Burlington. And therefore she inherited all his collection and Burlington House in London and Chiswick and Lismore Castle in Ireland. And so he is enormously influential on the collection here because his pictures and bronzes and furniture, he was a patron of Kent, and so there's a lot of his stuff here, all of it the absolute top quality. And then above him is the first Duke, who the man who painted his name in gold on the front of the house, quite rightly. And that picture of him on a horse is not a sort of a shrinking violet image at all. And I love that. I love that self-confidence. And it was a self-confident time. And he was made Duke in 1694 for getting William and Mary to come to be king. I mean, not by himself, but with a few others. And I think it says a lot about him, about how he felt about himself, about how he felt about the house. And I love that self-confidence.
As a child, I expect you must have looked at that picture and thought, hey, that's the kind of man I might like to be.
Well, I don't think I did really. I don't think that, you know, I don't think I ever, until actually after my father passed away, I don't think I ever felt that I was going to be Duke. So it wasn't the sort of thing that I took for granted or anticipated at all. Pretty illogical, but that's how it was.
In the spirit of those who've gone before, The Duke of Devonshire is spending £14 million renovating, cleaning and opening up Chatsworth to better reveal its treasures, among them his favourites. And this is one of your special treasures, isn't it?
This is a beautiful thing. It was made, I think, in about 1650 for the Savile family. The owl at the top is the emblem of the Savile family. Dorothy Savile married the third Earl of Burlington, the architect of Chiswick House, and this was perhaps made for her grandfather and passed down to her, and then their only surviving daughter, Charlotte, married the man who became the fourth Duke of Devonshire. And so Chatsworth inherited this and many other beautiful objects, and it's something which we have out often, sometimes on the visitor route, sometimes in our part of the house, and it's something which I think the workmanship is really astonishing. And you get a modern silversmith, somebody like Hiroshi Suzuki, to look at this, and they are amazed by the skill and would be delighted if they could make anything as beautiful as that. It is
auricular. It is something, this word auricular, meaning ear, meaning the shape of the ear. Is that what it's all about, the shape of the handles?
I think that is sort of shorthand for the style. It was made by Huguenot craftsmen who came to England in the 17th century for religious persecution reasons, and they were immensely skilled, and this is one of the products of that skill, and we're very lucky to have it.
It flows, doesn't it? Look at the lines. If you look all the way around here.
It's almost liquid. You could almost feel that it could melt away, and yet it's solid as anything.
Did your father give you any advice, any help before you took over Chatsworth?
No, not overtly, not as such, but he made it absolutely clear, first of all, how incredibly lucky we are. And that's right from the very beginning. It was always there. He was always talking about that, and that's quite an important, pretty obvious thing, but it was good that he kept it in the forefront. And also he loved Derbyshire, and he spent a lot of time going to various local things all his life, often 2 or 3 things a day, of a sort of civic nature, of a charitable nature. And so that was an example which I wouldn't come up to that standard, but he made it clear that there was that noblesse oblige, which is important, I think.
Would he have approved of you having so much energy now in Chatsworth, coming in and changing things and changing it to, you know, your artistic taste?
Yes, definitely. He collected very well. He collected the thing he's probably best known for is that he collected a lot of Lucian Freud paintings. He commissioned Lucian to paint a lot of members of our family. But he also collected some wonderful modern British things, and he added a lot to the collection of illustrated flower books. And he also added significantly to Georgiana Duchess's collection of minerals. So he collected on a fairly wide front, and he was very proud of that, and about those things he knew a lot about. So I think he would have been very enthusiastic. He loved Chatsworth being popular. He loved it that people liked coming. And naturally, it would be odd not to. I mean, there is a tension always between the curatorial influence, which is to keep everything as it is and not change it, and prevent it being damaged, and the fact that there's hundreds of thousands of people here doing their best to trample about and not overtly damage works of art, but to change things, because if you walk, so light's not good for stuff, but without it you can't see it.
Well, so what do you think about being known as a custodian of our nation's heritage? Is this something that you give any real thought to, or is it something that is just, part of your nature, you feel?
I think that you have to take it quite seriously. I mean, Chatsworth is very, very, very important to me, and we want to try and get it right. So we need to have good historical knowledge of what happened before we change things. We may then change them, but we need to know why it's what it was before we change it. I think that's really important, otherwise you can blunder about a bit. And I'm all for blundering about, but in a sort of knowledgeable way. And we have brilliant people who help us with that. And I think that I'm all for change. But if it's something like putting sculpture in the garden or redecorating a room, that's fine because it can always be put back. But to make significant physical change, we've got to be very careful. And we have the planning process, which is wonderful, and I think puts this country ahead of practically anywhere else in the world that I'm aware of. Without the planning process in this country, we would be living in a much less attractive place. And I think it's worth remembering that because they don't always get the benefit of the work that they do. So I think that the custodianship is crucial.
If it were me living here, as you're living here, to get up in the morning to see so many people walking around your house. I mean, it's not as though you're cut off from the house. You have a wing, but it all interlinks. You use this corridor to get to there, and you go through public areas and you meet people, and that's lovely. It is lovely, but also they're always there. You never can get away from them.
No, I don't feel it like that at all. The house doesn't open until 10:30, 11 o'clock, and it closes again sort of at the late afternoon. So then in the evenings and in the mornings, there's nobody much there. And also without people populating it, particularly, it would be, I think, very lonely and grim. And, of course, financially, it would be impossible. So all those things together, it's not just because of the money that the visitors provide, although that's important, but the very fact that Chatsworth and Derbyshire are being enjoyed by so many people from all over the world is a huge source of pride.
So Chatsworth endures. The present Duke is a collector in the mould of his ancestors. Sculpture and modern art are his passions. A new piece seems to arrive on the back of a lorry almost every week. And all around him are the ghosts of this great house, the first Duke's architecture, the fourth Duke's park, the extravagant sixth Duke's dining room, and his own father and mother's heroic role in restoring this important piece of the nation's heritage. This is the story of Chatsworth. What else can there be to discover? This is one of the hidden treasures of Chatsworth. A private theatre, rarely seen by the public. A wonderful reminder of how the present Duke's ancestors were so anxious to entertain their guests. It's absolutely magical. Just look at this. It's incredible. Imagine. Here is the evidence of the hand of one William Helmsley, who styled himself a leading London designer and supplier of theatrical scenery and appliances. They survive, and they're very rare indeed. This was originally a ballroom built by the Bachelor Duke in the 18th century, but turned into a theatre by the 8th Duke in the 1890s. The Prince of Wales came here. He came here so often that it was dubbed the Theatre Royal. But just look at it. The original proscenium arch, the gas lights, the pulleys, the curtains, everything as it was 120 years ago. So Chatsworth has everything. You cannot say you've seen England's stately homes if you've not been here. I think what appeals to me about Chatsworth is that it feels just right. It's made of local stone, it nestles into a wooded valley which looks as though it's been made to receive it. It feels as though it's been here forever. That didn't happen by accident. The Devonshires have worked at it over the years. Along the way, they've improved and extended this great house, loved it and cherished it, and filled it with treasures. The people of Derbyshire who walk in this park and have done for 300 years believe Chatsworth belongs to them. But in fact, it belongs to the nation. It may be privately owned, but thanks to the Duke of Devonshire, everyone can enjoy one of the treasure houses of Britain.